Okay, so let's have a look at what I'm asking here. I think we may have touched on this just before in the last session. Um, okay, so reason is actually for purpose, because the tool is reason and it helps you give you the choice of happiness and self-esteem. So we did touch on this before. Inviolate, but here we've got the definition. Inviolate certainty that his mind is competent to think and his person is worthy of happiness.
Yes.
Okay, which to me is an emotional estimate. Obviously, you can have it backed by reasoning, but you need to reach that point. Okay, I think we discussed this. How can you lose your reason? It's not so much do you lose it. You always have the capacity. It's just a question of if you exercise it or not.
Yeah, that sounds right.
And we discussed. So we did discuss self-esteem, and I think we sort of said that you agreed that it is an emotional estimate, but it has a logical basis to it, and you need to practice it to get it.
Yeah, you could say that. I mean, it's something psychological. I mean, that's the best way I can put it. I mean, maybe it's not necessarily an emotion. I don't know, but it's not like cognition per se either. Yes, it's emotion like that you have this sense of something, but I don't think it's strictly an emotion because emotional evaluation, you could say.
Right. And then worthy of happiness, I was just wondering, apart from altruism, what might cause someone to think that they're not worthy of happiness? Like maybe if you're not competent,
Yeah.
wait, if you're not competent to think, or if you don't have the
Yeah.
tool.
I would say if you don't think you're able to think, that's kind of what depression is in a way. When it's severe enough, like you don't feel like you're able to accomplish anything. And you might think, I can't think. Like I'm too stupid or something, which would be more an extreme case. But
Right. Well,
like if I
that's not
screwed up
even,
again, of course. Hmm?
what's that?
Like if somebody said to themselves, well, of course I screwed up again. I do everything wrong. I can't think right. That would be an example of something not altruism, just a failure to be able to live in the world.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So it wouldn't even be in terms of to recognize reason as your primary tool of survival is a completely different thing, but you can just feel that you're not able to cope with existence. That would be probably the most general, that you
Yes.
have no means to deal with it. And then you wouldn't be worth happiness.
Or you could even say, like, I have reason, but there's no way I can use it correctly. Or
Right.
nobody could use it correctly. So you get, who cares if I try? Because I'm going to fail anyway. Reason is impotent because it's too limited, you might say, or whatever it might be.
Right.
You need
But
to recognize it as a means of existence, not as an obstacle or as some barrier to acting or something like that.
are we saying that happiness must come from the feeling of competence with dealing with existence? There's just no way for you to feel unsure or not that competent about survival and feel happy. Is that what is being said?
Maybe more that if you do these things, you'll feel happy, and it's the only way that can happen anyway. You can't be happy by other means. In a way, it's suggesting that reason, purpose, and self esteem are the means for happiness, that those are things that allow you to be happy, and there's no other way to be happy.
Right. So then it almost gets into psychology, don't you think? If you're saying like, if someone doesn't have confidence in their ability to think, then that means they're definitely unhappy. Like that is almost a
Yeah.
form of, yeah, okay.
Or it could be a way to understand why does a person not feel fulfilled? Why are they not feeling as happy as you might, as they thought they would, or something like that?
Right. And we're saying it's always going to come down to one of these, or these actually.
Yes. Or the root
Reason.
of it would be one of those. Like the root
Mm,
would be that you have no goals. Maybe
right.
you might have no self esteem because you have no goals, or you might not see reason is valuable because you have no self-esteem, like just different things like that. And even from the research I know, depression or happiness is involved with these things, especially purpose. Having goals is a really important aspect of being happy. And many people have seen that within psychology, the psychology of happiness.
Right. But you said before if you don't have self-esteem, you don't have confidence and reason.
I think they imply each other.
Okay.
I mean, like, if you have no self esteem, then how could you possibly think that you're competent enough to use your reason as a means of survival?
Right. To thrive. But it's not like it couldn't be that you just start with low self-esteem and then you don't have confidence in your reason. It seems like it must be you start with this, you fail to identify some way of dealing with the world effectively, and then you don't have self-esteem.
I
uh
think that's most likely. I can't imagine another way of it going, starting with low self esteem. But in a way, like, if you did start with low self esteem, it would imply something about the other two already.
right.
But I
Okay.
mean, like, reason seems to be primary even still because everything seems to stem about, well, purpose is almost more important because the purpose defines what reason would be in a way, that the purpose is the goal and reason can be defined in terms of successful thinking for that goal.
Right. And I was thinking maybe the one exception would be in childhood, when you don't yet have a fully developed even maybe capacity for reason, but you're raised on like a
Yeah,
religious doctrine that tells you that if you have a thought, you're evil, and that kind of thing, and you don't have a way to even think about think about that properly. So
I
maybe
would say
that's one.
so.
And then that hampers your ability to reason.
Yeah, it's like a developmental barrier as
Right.
opposed to, say, parents that encourage you to read books a lot, just give you
Right.
whatever book you wanted. That's actually very good for child development. And within psychology, it's very clear that they need to be given this self esteem, especially with a purpose. Like, they're told, like, here's children often feel self motivated quite easily. In a way, you can interpret that as it's natural to use reason and self esteem or have them both. Like, it seems like a very natural thing. Kids seem to naturally seek out things and learn things that, like we talked about, I think, like, if a kid learns to walk, he has that usually a beaming smile. Like, you're never going to see a kid who's not smiling when he learns to walk. Like, it's so, like, the awareness that not only do they think correctly, but that it's succeeding, and also that they have a purpose to do
Right.
these things. And you can build it up early on, and you could keep learning that way and be like, get a strong education, grow as a strong individual if you approach things that way.
Have you read the essay Art and Moral Treason? I just read it yesterday.
I don't remember it though. I
It's
didn't
in
read it.
it's in the Romantic Manifesto, but it was obviously just collated essays. And she does talk about that as far as romantic art and its role in the development of someone's uh,
True.
moral values, which speaks to what you're talking about now.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we can jump to that if we have time. Um, all right, let's see what the next thing is. By the way, so it does seem like it's not psychology, it's philosophy, but philosophy is saying that there are certain very basic things that if you know about someone, you can make an inference as to their mental state. Like if they don't have much confidence in their thinking, then you're saying they will have low self-esteem. It's almost like a deductive thing, but
That would
because
be
it's
deductive, yes.
okay, but we're saying that's the case only with these very basic uh, values.
Um, it's just identifying the fundamentals, really, the essentials that the what, not the how.
Right.
This is what matters, but we don't know how this might be realized. We have to take into account special sciences, if you want, the detailed how answer, or how do we apply it more accurately? Yeah, you could infer that if a person lacks self-esteem, they don't have a purpose or something like that. And that's actually a pretty good inference. It's pretty reliably true.
Right. Or even more likely, lack of confidence in their ability to deal with the world.
Yeah, one of the two, yeah. Or
Yeah.
just or somebody has a tough time identifying purpose. Part of the issue might be their self-esteem, things
Hmm.
like that.
Okay, that's super interesting. Okay. Um, yeah, you said Brandon writes more about this because this one wasn't that clear to me, but
Yeah, Rand doesn't have
certainty.
more to say at
Yeah.
all. Like, she didn't say much.
Right. Um, okay, so this is touches on the same idea of these values being emotional estimates also, because here it says to value reason is the opposite not only of rejecting it, but also of accepting it dutifully. In regard to the mind, the objectivist is not disinterested or grudging. He does not say, I myself would rather be irrational, but sincerely say, I agree not to hold contradictions. He is the man who cherishes his means of survival, who recoils from the prospect of subverting it, and who is uplifted by the spectacle of dry objectivity. Um, so when I read this, I was thinking, okay, well, I can reason my way through this and start getting the concepts. But what is being said here is that for me to truly value it means internalizing it, it seems like, because I've got to have the feeling that I've got to recoil at the prospect of subverting it, which I definitely don't do. Or uh, it's not just um, me not rejecting it, but really embracing it and loving it. Like to me, that is a feeling, right? That almost speaks to it.
Yes.
Must be something must be automated. Would
Yeah.
you agree with that?
I wouldn't say that's the only time you value it. Maybe more that you can say it's been integrated or it's the
Okay.
deepest sense of valuing. But yeah, you value it, but to get a real deep sense of it, to say that it guides you, or what really matters is to value it in this deep way, to integrate it, to put it all together. But if you're really deeply valuing reason, you're not merely doing it because it's a rule, but you're maybe understanding even the deepest parts of valuing that you need reason and self-esteem, and you need a purpose. You need those things all go together, that you'll necessarily feel a happiness if you've integrated it and even acted with regard to it.
Okay.
And it would be the idea even that by being virtuous, by making it a habit, it's easy to be a good person. It might be hard to get there, but once you're there, it's not like it's a struggle. It's natural. It's just like your way of being.
Right.
Like it's more Aristotelian. Like when you do this, it's natural. It's not a struggle or effort. It's become habituated, as opposed to I think other thinkers. I think Kant in particular would say that to be good is itself, but always takes a great deal of effort. You don't automatize it. It's these very deliberate things, as far as I understand. But he's more about like it would be difficult and it doesn't become easy. It's just a different approach. This approach is more about um, living life a certain way, not just having certain beliefs.
Okay. So it actually ties into, I remember having the question a while ago of like, well, what if you do one small thing that's wrong? Or if you like steal this or do that? Maybe that's what it relates to is, although she doesn't speak of habit, but there's some link there of like you start automating a certain behavior. Like, when you can build up certain things you do. Like if I'm stressed, I might check my phone, which I don't do now, but let's say something like that, then it becomes like an immediate, your brain automates it. So maybe that's what she's getting at with the virtues. Like it's not that you do one wrong thing and you're going to die, but it will engrave a sort of habit in your mind of like going to that thing by default. Maybe that's something to do
Yeah,
with.
and
Yeah.
it
Okay.
goes against your life gradually over time. That you might be harming your self-esteem. You might be distracting yourself from things that you should think about when you should
Right.
think about them. And that's what would be the negative effect, which in the long run is negatively affecting your flourishing. That
Right.
you're just going the opposite direction. That's making it harder to flourish.
Right. What did I think about that I wanted to mention? Something to do with, yeah, those bad choices. If I remember, I'll tell you. I forget now. So, actually, no, I remember. You know, a while ago you said something like, over time, the evil can win out, something like that. It's not that it's like you become evil, but if you do something that's evil, like if you exercise, if you evade, then the idea, at least according to this, is that over time the evil is supposed to win out.
Yeah, unless you act to correct it, identify it,
Right.
or something like that.
So would it be correct for me? I was thinking about that and I was thinking, isn't it a bit like there's a battle in your soul and like there's some evil and it's like a force that's starting to win. But every moment, it's not like, let's take one example. Let's say um, you believe in God. And I'm not saying that's evil. I'm just saying
Yeah.
you choose not to think about it because there's all this conflicting information and you're like, well, I want God to exist because it makes me feel better and I'm scared if he doesn't exist.
Yeah.
But, you know, things come up like there's going to be, you're going to read something and it's going to go, well, this doesn't really fit with my belief in God, right?
Yeah.
So in a way, you've pushed, you believe in God, but you believed in it through there's some level of evasion there because there are facts that contradict. And so it's a battle in the sense that the battle is not fought every second of your life, but I have, let's say I have some evasion and I've in part of it is internalized, then every moment in the future, I may be confronted with some conflicting information. And that's when the battle starts. Because in that moment, I get to choose again, do I want to continue this evasion or not? And you can,
Yes.
and then you have that battle, and then there's the next battle, all from the one evasion, if that makes sense. So it's not like there's a constant battle in your mind, but just when certain contexts come up, then those bad premises or those bad habits get the chance to be reinforced. And that's what is meant by like over time evil can win, because you now have all these battles in the future when you're confronted with information that conflicts with something, or where you're presented with an opportunity to do something bad. Do you think that
I,
makes that way of conceptualizing it make sense?
yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it.
Okay.
It's a good
Good.
metaphor. Like the battle is a good metaphor. But yeah, even the question of God, like you ask yourself once, like, well, I don't want to ask it because it would be difficult to accept that he didn't exist. And then maybe you ignore the question, then something else comes up again. You have to decide, do I ignore it? Or do I deal with it this time? And it could become an even more normal policy of your life. If you keep doing it, you might just, you're right, you'd be like habituating, reinforcing the evasion, telling yourself,
Right.
like, I want to do this.
Right. Right. And that would explain why it's not like these things are instant, but it's like, let's say someone who's like thinking about God in their life, it might take like 5 or 10 years, because it's not like there's always going to be obvious information that conflicts for some people, if especially if they're not thinking abstractly already. There's not always, they're not always going to be presented with conflicting information, so it could take many years.
And it could expand even like, okay, you start evading one or two things, one fact. But then the more you get faced with the implications and things like that, you have to expand that evasion or accept the truth at that point. You can say, well, I'll just evade this one passage in the Bible that I question. I'll leave that aside. The rest is fine. But then you might start questioning more things, or evading more things. Like you might be looking at like who was Jesus as a person. Like, well, I don't want to analyze him too deeply. I'll just accept what it was. Or you might think in other areas of life, well, it didn't seem too bad when I evaded God, questions of God here. So maybe I can avoid the idea that, um, or whatever it might be, like I can avoid the idea that um, this person makes me happy, but this is a terrible relationship for me. People have been in that situation a lot. So I mean, you could just expand from each evasion to then generalize the evasions even in a weird, twisted way. Like the way more habitually you think conceptually, you're able to integrate better. You're able to think more broadly. It'd be like you're thinking more broadly in terms of evasion. Your evasions are even bigger and bigger over time.
Right. And I guess by
Unless you
definition,
stop it.
sorry, continue.
Like unless you stop it, otherwise it'll keep growing forever until it
Right.
consumes you.
And then by definition, if you're practicing integration, then you couldn't be at that point. It wouldn't be possible. And so that would mean that you're not consistently by mental habit practicing integration, which is necessary, apparently is necessary for honesty.
Right.
But I guess, so then the way to conceptualize it is that it's an ongoing battle, but the battle is not fought every second of the day. Especially take the example that you gave, or I gave with the one of God, and someone's working, I don't know, they work as an accountant. It's not like while they're doing taxation returns, they're going to be confronted with some contradiction to their belief in God. And so, and then on Saturday, they go and they watch cricket and they drink some beer. And then, repeat for the next repeat for like 8 months. But then after month 8, they go to some event and someone mentions something. So it's more like that, right? It's like the battle that how would you describe it? There's like the forces are within them, the evil forces and the good forces or whatever. I don't know if that's even the right way to, because according to this, that evil isn't a force. But like the potentiality is always there, but the battles do not take place all the time. They take place in intervals because you need certain context to be activated. Do you think I'm conceptualizing that correctly?
It might be getting too metaphorical at that point.
Yeah.
It's too much of a metaphor that
Yeah.
we weren't trying to apply it to anyway.
Yeah.
I would think of it like it is ongoing, this thinking, but like the struggles, well, not struggle, but it's always present that you need to be seeking your life. That's always present. A particular issue might only crop up um, at one particular moment for one particular battle. It shows up there, but it'll imply it has effects on the next action you take or later actions in your life. Right. And you might not know what those implications are. Hopefully, usually it's not too big right away, but they almost always grow. And that's a common observation, especially throughout literature. It always begins with something small in any story that's about the fall of somebody. It almost always grows into something worse and worse and worse. Like when you say about liars, like when you tell one lie and you want to keep that false appearance up, you have to just come up with more lies to justify those lies. Right. You have a web of lies everywhere. And that's the kind of growth we mean here. Like when you start small, yeah, it might be small, but there is an implication on so much more than this one event, this one action.
Right. Okay. So then the takeaway is more, it's not that I like the concept of the slippery slope, right? It's not that it necessitates you becoming more evil, but it does necessitate more difficult situations like that you don't know of. And then you're going to have to make the choice in that situation. Like if you are going down a slope and it is slippery, like it's more easy for you to keep going down than it is to go, okay, I got to stop this and then climb back up, right? That's the concept. But it doesn't necessitate. What examples were you thinking of, by the way, from fiction?
Breaking Bad.
Breaking Bad. Okay.
I'm trying to think. Some things in Greek stuff, like trying to think in the Iliad. Anybody?
Oh, really? Even in the Iliad?
I think maybe. Or it's the implication. Yeah, I would say the Iliad. Like when Paris kidnaps Helen and goes to Troy, that's a pretty big deal, and probably one immoral thing. Started out with one thing, and it became a world war across more than 10 years long, just from that one choice.
Right.
And it builds up from all these bad choices people make. Like Achilles is too vengeful, or Ajax kills too viciously and too easily, or all kinds of things like that, or the the gods get jealous and they start attacking each other, and it just grows and grows into this. Obviously, what we know is the Trojan War. It's just this out of control thing.
Is there any other concept for that apart from slippery slope?
Slippery slope. I don't think that'd be a common way to describe it. Slippery slope. I can't think of one.
Because I was reading about in Dr. Jekyll and Dr. Hyde, he starts out by being able to control it, and then he loses control.
Yeah.
And then same in it's interesting that you mentioned that. It would be good for me to concretize that with more fiction, because that's definitely happened in Musashi too.
I think
Okay.
it happens a lot in fiction that I like. It happens a lot in things that I love watching.
Right. It's interesting. Okay. Let's see what the next thing is. Develops and preserves. What does it mean to, I understand to develop, but what would it mean to preserve the faculty of reason? Like to, well, even to develop, actually, virtue is that the action in this instance, the virtue that develops, preserves, and applies the faculty of reason is rationality. So, okay, if I want to be rational, what does it mean for me to develop my reason, like, or even preserve it? Understand and apply it, like identify contradictions is basically applying it, right?
Yeah. I'm trying to find. Let's see. Preserve. Preserves. Let's see. It would seem preserve in the sense make use of, to not let stagnate or something to that effect. Let me see. Search this book. Let's see. Preserve. Um, Here we go. I guess to allow it to continue functioning. Um,
to allow it.
it seems like a weird usage.
Yeah.
Is that a
I'm
quote from
asking because
Daniel?
I want to know, all right, if I want to be rational, what is that? Apart from like asking questions, what does that what does that mean?
Trying to see if Terry Smith has something. Gives an Aristotle quote. Oh,
Does she go into when we're thinking about these virtues, we're not thinking of applying rationality directly, but we're thinking of rationality in terms of its aspects. So productiveness, pride, right? We're not thinking of like, all right, how do I be rational? We're thinking, am I being prideful? Am I being productive? That's what we're doing, right?
yeah. I mean, that's what we are doing. And by looking at that, we're seeing if we are being rational, if we are making use of our rational faculty.
Okay.
Let's see. Let's see. Well, it does not maintain. Preserve, preserve, preserve. That which is required. Yeah, I think it just means the use of it. So it doesn't go away or wither away. That seems to
Right.
be what he means.
Okay. So maybe as habit.
for example, yeah, or just to make sure you're using it, that it's not becoming unhabitual. So yeah, I mean, to see if it is growing into your nature, to your way of being.
Yeah, I definitely need more examples to be
Yeah,
fully clear on what that looks like. But anyway, we can. What about this? So, I mean, this is an example. I know this is not what he means, but like, I'm just, this sounds good. I'm just like, well, how do you apply it? Because, he's saying, uh, this means the application of reason to every aspect of one's life and concern. I'm like, well, I know he doesn't mean if I'm a tennis player, I'm like, well, let me check that my forehand is validated while I'm playing tennis. Like, I know that doesn't mean that, but how do I, well, I don't even know if I'm applying, like, how do you figure out if you're applying reason to every aspect of your life and concerns? Like, it's not that obvious to me. What?
I would think of it in terms of at least integrating the fact that you chose to play tennis, for example, not necessarily. I mean, it's applied to everything you do, but doesn't mean you're using it for every single action. I would say it's more indirect, I think, in the case of the tennis example. I mean, you did use reason to decide, am I going to play tennis? It would be different if, like, on mere whim, you played tennis, or is
Right,
it related to tennis because you choose to practice?
right,
You choose to improve your techniques. Even though when you're playing, you're not thinking about whether the forehand is the right move at that point, but whether you've applied reason to recognize that maybe tennis is something to play, to recognize the rules, to recognize what kind of techniques are appropriate, or what kind of techniques can be learned or improved. That's how I interpret it.
What what aspect of rationality is the principle that emotions are not tools of cognition? Like I was trying to think, well, that's sort of a principle, isn't it? And but then
Yeah,
what virtue would that fit under?
well, virtues are types of principles, but as far as that seems to be more to do with, I don't know, it seems one of the more ambiguous ones. I mean, as always, it seems to imply a lot of the other ones. Most things are honesty to me. It's hard for me to think of them in other ways because I guess honesty is, in a way, my favorite virtue. And I tend to think of things in that terms of that usually. I can with the others, but it's not my go to. And I could imagine what emotions are not music cognition, what those could do with in terms of pride or productivity, but it's easier to apply it to honesty, I think, because you're understanding how do your mental states function. What are the ways you can attain knowledge or demonstrate that there's true facts rather than a feeling of it, that something's true, things like that.
So you think it's a sub principle of honesty. Emotions are
I would
not
say
tools
so.
of cognition. Okay.
Or it's most easily applicable to being honest. It's easiest to frame in terms of honesty.
Right.
You probably could frame it in different ways, but that's the way I think of it. That's how I get my examples for it. Like it's connected to all the virtues, but maybe one stands out more.
Okay.
That's how I think of it.
All right. Um, how do you then we sort of touched on this a couple of conversations ago with like there are a lot of principles and they don't necessarily belong directly under any virtue that you can think of. But then there's too much to hold. So like, if you're like, oh, emotions aren't tools of cognition, the principle of purpose, the trader principle, and there's all these things that you're like,
True.
uh, it's like they sort of like trader principle sort of belongs under justice. That's where it was written about a lot.
More so.
But there's some that don't seem to fit into any. And then you're just like, it's not like a integrated thing where you can think of, okay, well, justice involves this and that and this principle. Some principles don't, or even the principle of unit, what was it? The unit perspective principle or something. Um,
Yeah.
that
Well,
those are also
I think you're right to say it should it helps to put it under one main virtue. I mean, like when I think of it, like I said, honesty is because I basically put it under honesty primarily. I'm not ignoring all the other ones. It's just that I've made this one as the one that stands out, the one that's most important when I'm thinking about virtues.
Okay. As another example, then, what about principle of charitable interpretation?
Or justice. I go to
That would be
justice
under
as well.
justice. Ah, okay. Yeah. I
At least
didn't
that's
think
what I
about.
do in my mind. I mean, I'm not denying that they're connected to everything, but one stands out as most important, and that helps
Right.
me keep it organized.
Well, justice is dealing with men, and interpretation is
Yes.
dealing with men. So, okay, that makes sense. It then becomes a question of how do you, which we discussed, like, do you have a list and just practice that all the time? Or, but yeah, that's cool. Okay. Okay, what about another? I got another one for you before we continue on this. There's some principles from Mortimer Adler's book called How to Read a Book, and he's got
Yep.
all these systems and principles for reading a book. What would I put that under? I originally just put it under rationality because I couldn't figure out if it fit under any virtue. I was just trying to like, how do I make this a principled way of approaching reading books? I'm like, well, how can I integrate it so that I can have it under some virtue? But
Mm,
like principles of reading books, for example. So that's knowledge acquisition in a way.
yep. Um, Knowledge acquisition. That might be more independence, honestly, because you're trying to see how you understand the book to make sure you understand in your mind what's being said. To me, that's almost more independent. When I think of that, I mean, I don't organize it strictly in that way. Like it is under there, but then in my mind, it's still also organized under like learning in a way.
Yeah, for me
Like I
too.
have
I did.
multiple concepts here, but yeah,
Yeah, I put it under learning because I couldn't figure out. The only reason I'm trying to figure out if I can put it with principles or integrate all of them is because it's easier to remember. Otherwise, I just have all these random things I learn, and you don't.
yeah.
They're not all tied together. So, yeah, I mean, what's another example I can think of that I had at one point? Oh, habits. So I read Atomic Habits, and there are all these principles that it comes up with for implementing new habits. And I'm like, well, how would I retain this? The only way I can think of is to find a way to integrate it. But I can't, those are scientific principles, but I can't make sense of how you would integrate it with your moral principles so that it's it's like obvious and you can constantly be applying it.
Um, as far as reading books, like whatever principles those may be, like I would have a whole organization of how to read books and different concepts and principles within that within that organization that I have, whatever it is in my mind, and that how to read a book itself is just one thing, and I would probably put it under independence or learning, or maybe I'll make a subcategory in rationality for myself that I think is working pretty well.
Right.
I mean, and that would
Right.
be pretty organized. You could have different aspects. I mean, you could try to use reason, purpose, and self esteem as other categories too, because those aren't strictly virtues. So you might want to think about them a little differently. So you can put some concepts under there too, if you're trying to integrate it with your way of acting in the world, way of doing, knowing what's the right thing to do.
Right. Okay. Let's see what else is
So how to
here.
read a book could be even purpose, like how to be efficient with your goals. That's another way you could even look at it. And reason is more about the virtues. Like underneath the cardinal value of reason, you can have all the virtues quite easily. And under self-esteem, more emotional concepts, maybe like sense of life might go under self-esteem, for example, or a connection to sense of life, things like that.
Right. But not so much principles of method, because then it would be a virtue, right? Like if we're talking about habit or reading a book, suddenly those principles are virtues because they're a means to an end.
Usually,
Yeah.
of course, there's a lot of overlap, so it's never like a strict category. There's definitely overlaps,
Right.
and that's difficult to deal with. And I don't have many recommendations on that. but that is where it goes from there. Like once you start the organization, some deeper principles would be, how do you deal with related concepts? How do you deal with
Right.
very large networks of knowledge? Then it gets really complex, but the principles are here at least. They get to condense knowledge and find units and differential, things like that.
But it seems like that would be the way to remember it and make use of it, as opposed to just acquiring all this knowledge and not just
Right.
forgetting it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so we skip that. Okay, so rationality is the recognition and acceptance of reasons as one only source of knowledge. Application of reason to every aspect of life's concerns. Means choosing and validating one's opinions, decisions, work, one's love in accordance with the normal requirements of the cognitive process. Logic, objectivity, integration. Let's see what I asked. What am I asking here? What the hell? Because I was confused why I said these three, maybe because, like, to me, isn't logic, objectivity, and integration? Doesn't it integrate both of those? So if you're saying the requirements of logic, objectivity, and integration, have I missed something? Like, logic is objectivity and integration, right? So, but maybe he's just saying that to emphasize
I think they're
that or something.
synonyms for the most part.
Okay. Okay.
There's subtle differences, but
Right.
that's where you could use all three. But I still see them as pretty referring to the same thing, just
Yeah.
different aspects of the same thing.
Okay. Got it. Hmm. Okay. Let me just check the question first. Okay. So I think this is about, again, the practice of rationality, because I'm like, if I'm in the gym and I hear a song I like, what does that mean? That I need to identify that impression in conceptual terms and integrate it into my conceptual context? Uh, is the reason we need to. Okay, I think I answered my question there, but let's read the passage. Um, one cannot follow reason unless one exercises it rationally. Rationality demands continual mental activity. Okay. Okay, so she's saying it's an actively sustained process of identifying one's impressions in conceptual terms, of integrating every event, every observation into a conceptual context. And so, yeah, I'm wondering about, like, what does that mean? Like, does, like the example I gave is, if I hear a song and I'm like, oh, I like that song, would that mean putting it into a conceptual context and going, I like it because of this and that? Or how? Because I don't go through my day unnecessarily. I don't think I go through my day much at all putting things in. Oh, well, I don't know. Like, there'll be impressions, but I don't know how much I put them in conceptual terms. But
Um,
she's saying every event, every observation, like, how, if you feel now, you've got to be conceptually cognizant of what that feeling is.
it's hard to know exactly to what extent she means identifying, because you could see it. You can listen to a song, enjoy it, and realize that you like the beat of it or something, or it
Right.
sounds upbeat to you. I
Right.
mean, to me, that's the emotion. You're recognizing what it was, and it doesn't have to be even much there. But what would that mean to identify it in conceptual terms? I think it would be ridiculous to say you've got to completely deconstruct it to find what are the different aspects of the song, what exactly made you
Me too.
happy, and what. I mean, that would seem a bit insane. It seems to me that it's saying that you should at least be able to put it in the context of your life. or just say like, oh, that's a reaction to sense of life, or like I wouldn't even think much beyond that. Like, oh, the way I would identify it in conceptual terms, just say, oh, that's a sense of life reaction. I mean, I might
Right.
say something like that, or
Right.
it's a reaction to the upbeatness of the song. And I'm not really going deeper than that. You could probably do that within a split second of hearing a song on the
Right.
radio. And that's what I do. Is like, oh, I know this song and blah blah blah, and in 2 seconds I can think of what it means or what the context is, without really going deep into it.
I agree that like it would be ridiculous to go, oh, why do I like it? What are the different aspects for every little single thing that comes up? But the reason I ask this is because when you habituate certain ways of, doing things, then you don't know what other approaches there are and how beneficial they are. Like you can't get into someone else's head and see, you know,
Yeah,
if you could get into someone else's head and see how they think, you might go, oh, I really like that way and I'm going to copy it. That was my motivation for the question, but I don't know if there's a specific answer right now.
yeah.
Okay. So the context here was discussing seeking effects without causes. For example, a nice car, great love. So this is a bit I don't. This is saying the error of seeking causes without effects. That means taking certain actions while evading or expecting to escape its consequences. Okay, so there's the alcoholics, drug addicts who shut their eyes to the self-destructiveness of behavior. The same phenomena exists in many other forms. An example is the people who regularly want more favors from the government or more bureaus while ignoring the escalation of controls this involves and the political denouement it forebodes. What I didn't understand is that aren't you seeking an effect? Like you're seeking to get paid from the government, or you're seeking to have the pleasure of dimness of alcohol. And so I'm just trying to get my head around this, like seeking a cause. Like, what is the cause here? They're just seeking to get drunk and that have the effect of being drunk. But that so I get the seeking effects without causes, like finding a love even if you haven't earned it, but not seeking causes without effects.
Yeah, I don't see that they don't see the destructiveness of their behavior. That they just want to cause without effects. I mean, I don't know if I could say that they don't want the effects or that they don't see the effects. Um, I mean, maybe they seek the cause and don't care about the effect. Doesn't mean they don't want a cause without effect. Just means they don't care. Um,
In the context of the let's say the alcoholic, what would the cause be and what would the effect be that the effect they're ignoring and the cause they're seeking? Like, what is the cause there?
cause
Because to me, they're
alcohol.
not seeking a cause; they're seeking an effect.
Just the way it's phrased, I would say just the alcoholism or alcohol is the cause. Effect is destructiveness of their behavior. So they want the cause, the alcohol, and Peikoff is saying, but they want the cause without the effect of self-destructiveness. But that doesn't make sense to me. I mean,
Yeah,
I
it
think
doesn't
that's what
make
he
sense.
means, but it doesn't make sense what he's saying
It
to me.
doesn't make sense to me either. And same with the people who want the government favors. They're just seeking effects, not causes. Like I didn't get
Well,
that.
I mean, I still like to see it as a cause being the first thing, the effect being just the result, and it's just saying, oh, they only care about the initial thing they want. They don't care about the
Right,
effects of what they want.
right.
But still, I don't think that's really true. I
Me
mean, they
neither.
could see causes without looking at effects or without caring about effects. But I would say you should care because that is a vast implication on your life. Like what the thing you seek, what else does it cause? What impact does that lead to? That's what you would want to think about. And avoiding that would be bad. But it doesn't mean if you do avoid it, that was because you don't want the effects. It might just mean you don't care about them.
Right. Right. Okay. Uh, so he's saying here, I think he's saying in an emergency which requires immediate decision, and the person in conflict has to act without full self-knowledge. He must be guided by his mind, his best conscious judgment of what is consonant with reality. But I'm like, you can't even think in an emergency. When a crisis is over, he can inquire. So you go with your mind, but often the mind isn't quick enough to deal with emergencies.
Yes, I agree
And
with
so
you.
I think there's something wrong with this, but
I mean, I
it's
know what he's
open.
saying, but I disagree with him. He is
Yeah, okay.
saying that if you have a conflict, the mind is the thing you listen to. But I think if you generally consider it a conflict, the emotion actually might be more accurate. You can't really know which is the case, and they probably might need to take it slow, but doesn't mean the mind will necessarily be right because you might not even be recognizing that you've habituated some bad thinking habit, and the emotion is actually the one that's more accurate, more genuine, more true to who you are in the sense of what leads to your success in life. And you might be end up ignoring it by accident. And that would be bad. You can well, I do think Peikoff is incorrect here. Not that we should defer to the emotions as telling us something true necessarily, but that sometimes because we can't act with full knowledge, full self knowledge, and in fact, it might be highly stressful. It might be important just to use the emotion at that
Yeah.
particular time.
Yeah. Even though we know it can be wrong and it's based on past thinking, it's just that we don't have time to think about it. So
And you,
you
of
just,
course, you want to recognize that it was an emotion, but of course, that much. But I think in those times, maybe the clash isn't necessarily resolved by deferring to one or the other. I don't
right.
think you should really defer either way. Just go what's whatever. Go with the emotion sometimes if it's really distraught, really difficult, and really like
Urgent.
really difficult.
If
And
it's
if it's
urgent,
urgent.
basically. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
But if you're just talking about like what movie should I see? I mean, well, even then emotion might be still useful. Just you might just do it that way. But I mean, maybe like when you're deciding what computer to buy, when new computer, like you don't want to go by emotion there. Like you can deliberate, you can do it. You've got the time. You might have to do some things just statistically, just saying most people like this one, but for the most part, you're using your mind to evaluate it. But of course, if you're in a situation like um, maybe if you're doing a test and you have to write something in an essay and you feel a bit stuck, you might want to actually use reasons, but you might need your the help of your emotions sometimes because they do provide information. You could evaluate it, or maybe that's not such a good example, but the
Yeah. I
idea
mean,
being that your emotions are valuable and they can tell information even if they don't give you knowledge per se.
yeah, with that, I agree. I was just thinking of two different examples. So one is let you see someone drowning and they're about to die. And so it's hard to go, okay, let me just go through my value system and think this over. Like you've got to act now or nothing. So that's emotional. Versus your example you gave of a movie, you can reason, I want to go watch a movie, but how I pick the movie, I don't really care. I'm just going to go by whim. I think they're two different.